Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Toronto, Rebecca.
Thanks
for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So Kyle covered off a bit of your bio, but he didn't mention that you live in San Francisco with your husband, 2 children, and a dog.
Yes.
What type of dog do you have?
Australian Shepherd.
Okay.
Super smart, way too smart for his own good.
Way to go. Very athletic.
Yes.
Great. Well, obviously, Carl did a great introduction with the bio. We've got a tremendous track record in the sustainability space.
Kind of you.
I'd first of all like to just ask you to touch on something that you said in an event that I was at last year. So, in the fall last year, Uber hosted in London a global electrification conference called Go Get Zero. And during that conference, I was lucky enough to hear Rebecca speak. And she said, in closing her comment, she said, if we can electrify Uber, we can electrify the world. And I'd love you to expand on that and just let people know really what you mean and what the potential is.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for coming to Go Get Zero. For those who don't know it, it's our annual sustainability showcase at Uber. So we get to talk about everything we're doing in sustainability and what we plan to do for the next year or so. So thank you for coming and for listening.
Oh,
what I meant by that, which is kind of the main reason I went to Uber, is that Uber is a bit of a petri dish or a leading indicator of what's happening kind of in greater society. So what's happening in society is happening on Uber, and what's happening in Uber is happening in society. And that's really because of the scale of the platform. Last quarter, we did 3 billion rides and trips on our platform. And so the sheer scale of Uber is pretty incredible. And so when you think about electrifying Uber as a platform, it really has some similar challenges, but on a smaller scale to general population. So really what I intended to say there was, if we can find practical ways to get our Uber drivers to opt for electric vehicles and to get our riders to opt for electric transportation, then there's a lot of learnings there that we can basically transfer to general population and spur adoption forward more quickly.
Awesome. I look forward to diving into some of those tactics that you're using in a moment. So you've obviously working with Uber currently, you've got a great background with Tesla and running your own clean tech business as well.
Mm-hmm.
What gets you up in the morning and what motivates you to keep pushing in this area?
Yeah, well, I have to make a joke first, which some of the folks on my old team will remember this joke. But what wakes me up in the morning is my kids. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and so they always wake me up in the morning. But, bigger picture than that, what drives me is a passion around the environment for sure. And honestly, I think if you don't have that passion, it's hard to be in this industry because, as you see right now, there are ups and downs. And so you have to be able to ride through those. And mine comes from, I had a wonderful opportunity to travel to China quite a bit for my startup. Between 2010 and 2013, I don't know if anybody spent time in China during those years, so got a hand. So you probably remember the air quality. It was unavoidable. So if you track or know AQI, air quality index, it's 0 to 800 plus on the scale, and anything above 250 is considered unhealthy. There were many days over 400 on that scale that I was there, and if you haven't experienced that, not that I want anyone to ever have to experience it, but it is life-changing. You really do kind of struggle to breathe. I remember seeing kids wearing masks inside to play. And so, at that time it was kind of life-changing. Having children now and thinking about the world that they will grow up in and be in eventually, it's life-changing. And for me, it was just a moment that I said, I want to do everything I can to make sure that is not the future that we're headed towards.
So the EV transition, if you like, has been very heavily driven by the climate crisis. And there's been a lot of funding, a lot of government policy that has motivated this movement in that direction. But as we know, there are a lot of other benefits of electrification, which have kind of taken a second tier to the climate story.
Mm-hmm.
And now that climate, in some places isn't quite such a welcome word as it once was.
Yeah.
To what extent is Uber, when you're working with drivers or you're working with municipalities and regions where you operate, how are you positioning your message around electrification? Are you leading with this is a climate issue that we need to go with, or is it about clean air, as you're just talking about, or is it about the economic side?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so, I think the great thing about sustainability and electrification at Uber is that we have lots of reasons that we're pursuing it. And, to just be very specific, benefits for drivers. Right now, today, many of our drivers across the world take home more money because they drive an EV, right? So there is absolutely cost advantages, not for every driver, to be clear, but for many of our drivers, they get more money. They take home more money because they operate an EV. So absolutely benefits for drivers, benefits for riders. If you select Uber Green or Comfort Electric and you get into an EV, we see better reviews, higher tipping from our customers who ride in EVs, so more satisfaction, smoother ride, higher tech, lots of the benefits that we all hear. And then, of course, yes, we do position ourselves and our messaging around the benefits for cities, especially because, as most of you know, Uber drivers are high mileage drivers. So for every Uber driver we transition to an EV, we get bonus points above just general population adoption because those drivers are driving 3 to 4 to 5 times more than just an average driver. And so to your broader question around, how are we positioning it? Yes, I would say in this moment, it's super important that we're pragmatic, right, about what are the benefits of our sustainability and electrification program. So we do focus on those very clear benefits. But I would just say that it's a bit easier for Uber than others because we already have some of these moments or places where the economics work. So I might juxtapose that with something like sustainable aviation fuel, which is always kind of 2x the cost still. It's very binary. But for us, we have many drivers today on one side of the bell curve who get better economics today because of EVs. And then the last thing I'd say, because I'm an optimist, my old team here knows that yes, there are big challenges right now and headwinds that we're facing for sure, but there are also tailwinds around electrification. One that we talk about a lot at Uber right now, as you're probably not surprised to hear, is autonomous vehicles. And I know that feels pretty far out there. Actually, another show of hands. How many of you have seen an autonomous passenger vehicle? Okay, leave it up if you've ridden in one. Okay, so a little, pretty good little prophecy for you. 3 years from now, all your hands will be up for sure. And the cool
3 years.
3 years, I think.
Okay.
3 years.
You're
That's my prophecy. Yes, I'll come back and you can hold me to it. But AVs, why am I talking about this in the context of sustainability? They're all built on an EV platform, right? So that is a natural tailwind that we will see coming over the next few years, where more EVs on the Uber platform just by kind of organically happening because of AV adoption as well.
So Uber drivers are transitioning to electric 5 times faster than the general public.
Yeah.
You've mentioned some of the messaging that goes to them, but obviously with these owner drivers, it's a big investment.
Totally.
How are you achieving those numbers, and how are you being so successful at that rate of change?
Yeah. First, I'll just say, since we're so proud of that stat, that number here in Canada is actually 6x. So here in Canada, we're very, very proud of it. And I think we all should be excited about it because, again, Uber drivers are such high mileage drivers. You convert one of those, you get way more emissions benefit. So we're really proud of that stat. And generally how I talk about our work at Uber is in electrification is kind of a flywheel. So, our job is to create demand for the sustainable option, in this case an EV. So that means, you ride Uber Green or you ride Comfort Electric. Actually, I'm going to make you show hands again. This is interactive. How many of you have ridden Uber Green, selected Uber Green? Yes. Fantastic. Thank you for your business. So, create demand for that green option. That's the first piece of the flywheel. Second piece of the flywheel is how do we make supply of that option easier? So that could be make it cheaper, or it could be make charging more seamless. But it's all around supply. And then the third piece of the flywheel is, how do we educate and make increase awareness? And the faster and faster we can push that flywheel, the quicker we see adoption go. So that's the framework that the team and I think about. Some specific stuff that Uber does. One, we go with direct incentives right now. We know right now that in a lot of our regions, the economics just don't make sense, and we want to try to sweeten that as much as we can. Here in Canada, Uber drivers can get up to $4,000 a year for driving, depending on your tier of driver. to drive EV for us. You get $1 per EV ride. So it's direct incentives to help bring down your total cost of ownership. That's a very clear one. Another big chunk is we try to invest as much as we can in tech, as you guys can imagine, since we're a tech company. That's both for features for drivers who are thinking about EVs. We have a whole Uber hub where you can get everything kind of EV and what it means to adopt an EV. We're working on a digital mentorship program. We're working on an AI chatbot that's rolling out other areas, and we'll bring it to Canada. And we have tech for our existing EV drivers. Charge map, battery-aware matching, we can talk about all of that, but basically tech features. And then the last group I'll maybe bring up is partnerships. So we have, in different regions, partnerships with OEMs to decrease the cost of EVs. We have partnerships with charging infrastructure providers to decrease the cost. But you can kind of see how all of these initiatives go back to this basic flywheel of create demand, try to address supply, increase supply, and then kind of talk about it, just like with our Go Get Zero event I mentioned.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of basic framework we use at Uber to drive forward EV adoption. And, you know, it's awesome. For those of you who have been in the space a long time, I've been in the EV industry 15 years, and I know it's a challenging moment right now, but like stepping back, bigger picture, we have cities around the globe that are 30 to 40% EV miles on our platform is like, I don't know, it's just an incredible, I think, moment right now in adoption. So I know it's very challenging, you know, if we're zoomed in, but zooming out, we've seen some pretty incredible adoption of EVs on our platform, and I also think in the general population.
So one of the items you touched on was the charging map that the drivers will get within the app.
Yeah.
And obviously public charging is really critical for these drivers. Often when I speak to the Uber Green drivers, they don't have charging at home because they might be in a rental or something like that, so they rely heavily on it. And unlike people like myself, where driving is mainly for leisure, you know, time is money. How are you able to help them with opportunity charging? And I'm going to give you a B question as well.
Okay.
What's your ultimate vision for how you would like to see charging infrastructure investments deployed? So somebody's going to spend a load of money on public charging. What would you like that to look like?
Yeah. Stepping back a bit, giving a few numbers here. So you're absolutely right. Charging is hyper critical for us on Uber because of our driver population. So first, 50% of our drivers tell us that they stop once a day to charge. So a pretty consistent part of their daily routine. Second, we know they are highly dependent on public infrastructure. They do not have access to home infrastructure at the same percentages or levels that the general population does. So it's an even bigger issue. And then, as most of us in this room know, satisfaction with an EV goes down if you do not have as much access to home charging. And so all of that creates kind of a perfect storm for our Uber drivers around, charging is a challenge. So then what are we doing and what do we want to do? You know, candidly, I don't think we've done enough in charging. I'm a charging gal, so maybe that's an obvious opinion that I would have. But you know, what we have done today, we've done some features and functionality. As I mentioned, our charging map basically allows our drivers to kind of look at all of the charging options, select, understand cost, availability, those types of things. Nothing really industry leading, but you know, it's there and available. We do have battery-aware matching, which I do think is a fantastic step forward. What does that mean? That means, as an Uber driver, we're not going to give you a ride that you can't complete because you don't have enough charge, or that gets you like very close to low, or that takes you away from infrastructure. So that's a pretty smart feature that is really focused on kind of the ride-hail industry and critical just for like a baseline experience. And then we do have some partnerships around charging. They're pretty light. But if I think about where we want to go, you know, anyone who's in charging infrastructure, you know that the name of the game is utilization from a financial standpoint. And Uber drivers, if you don't think of it already, you should recognize that they are a gold mine, right? Because they do have that consistent charging, they're driving a ton, and they are reliant on public charging. So the reason I say all that is to say that Uber should be able to play a fantastic role in kind of baseline demand for public charging stations. And so without going into too much around what we're planning and exposing too much, I would just say that, you know, Uber needs, and we want to make sure that we have a very active role in the development of public infrastructure, because again, we have that baseline demand that we can really aggregate for CPOs or charging point operators. So that's the vision. And then maybe the last comment I'll make is, in terms of what do I think the perfect setup of charging infrastructure looks like, or where do we need to invest, I'm greedy here for my Uber drivers, but multifamily housing, for sure, with more overnight charging is absolutely like the ultimate holy grail. We know it's a great experience. We know it's lower cost. We know it is like zero opportunity cost, right? Because you're just going home anyway. That's the holy grail for sure for our Uber drivers. But we also know, and folks from Tesla also know, that you've got to have kind of a baseline of public fast charging too, just to get people over the chasm of adopting an EV. So it's almost like, what's the actual good investment versus what is the perception investment that you have to make, even if that's not what an average user would use on an absolutely like daily basis. So it's a combination there where we've got to kind of do the minimum investment in public infrastructure, and then as much as possible drive towards home charging, multifamily charging, apartment charging, all of those kind of, let's say, more elegant applications of charging.
So drawing on your global experience, I'd love you to share what's worked well with other cities, other regions, in terms of helping advise and guide on charging infrastructure deployments, or even best practices in terms of the way they roll out their rideshare solutions. So we know we have many municipalities in the audience.
Yeah, a couple examples that come to mind. I mentioned earlier that it's really exciting to see, EVs proliferate on the Uber platform, and some of those leading cities, London is one of them, Amsterdam is one of them, Vancouver is actually one of them as well at the top of the list. Woo! But if I pull on a couple of examples there, London, if you guys aren't aware, they have a congestion zone, has a very, very steep fee for traveling through that congestion zone. If you have an EV, you don't have to pay that fee, or you pay a vastly discounted fee. That's under discussion right now, but it is absolutely true that one policy approach has driven vast adoption of EVs in London. So very, very attractive policy and very effective policy at pushing EV adoption, especially for ride-hail drivers. So that's maybe one example I would give you. I don't want to tread too much into like access to different EV types, but I think the honest truth is that the biggest piece of adoption is what are the economics of adoption for drivers and the general population, and access to affordable EVs, unless you can make it up with a bunch of additional incentives or rebates or those types of things. Having access to low-cost EVs is super critical. I mean, if you look at LATAM right now, we're actually seeing some pretty incredible growth there simply because of more access to low-cost EVs. And so that's something we can't ignore. I know that's a nuanced point and has a lot deeper discussion we could go into, but that's also something that we're seeing working in other regions. Just once you get access to the lower-cost EVs, the adoption curve that's climbing up.
So that price parity is
it is
key tipping point moment.
Absolutely, it is. And like I said, I mean, I'm an optimist, but we are seeing this in many regions, which is so exciting. Having been in this space for 15 years, like organic adoption in a number of our cities in Europe is just kind of starting to snowball, and it's just incredible to see. But it's because we've gotten to good economics and reliable, accessible charging infrastructure, which is kind of the two pieces of the equation.
I mean, you mentioned the London congestion zone charging, but it's interesting seeing New York's move into the space as a North American city, and seeing it. I mean, I don't know if you've got any early insights on how it might be affecting rideshare at all.
Yeah, I don't have insights right offhand, but in general, I think I'd say maybe from a personal standpoint, the experience is improved. Experience as a rider is certainly improved, but I don't have specific data points on like what we've seen in terms of impact on rideshare.
Right. Yeah, interesting to watch as
it's very interesting
as the debate unfolds.
Yes.
You mentioned partnerships earlier, automakers and charging infrastructure.
Yep.
Again, it was one of the talking points in your speech at Go Get Zero in London. And I'd love you to expand on that. There's obviously lots of companies and lots of players in the market here today, who are looking for partnerships, how they can support your work. And
I'd
love you to signal how best they might be able to get engaged and
Absolutely.
What kind of things you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I go back to kind of that equation that we talked about, economics and then charging infrastructure that's accessible and reliable. So, I think I said there that, partnering and, never seen before ways. Uber absolutely needs to find a way to use its scale to help drive up volume and thus drive down costs. I think I actually heard the last panel talk a little bit about this, where, we have to get over this moment where the volume just isn't there, but we see on the horizon that at higher volumes you can get down the costs that make things more attractive. So Uber absolutely, we are looking for ways to get confident in aggregating our demand and then working with partners to see those lower costs. Some examples, absolutely having more direct relationships with OEMs. That's something that we haven't done as much of in the past, but I think this is kind of a last few years and next few years we will be getting more and more into that, where Uber is kind of committing to a volume that our drivers can use, and at that volume we can actually drive down prices. So that's one area of partnerships that I think is super important and moves the needle on economics. Another area is absolutely charging providers, as I alluded to before. Like, there should be kind of a minimum offtake type of thing that Uber moves to. We're not there today, to be clear, so don't run up to me yet and, as a CPO, and say, hey, let's do that. We're not there yet, but we're definitely chugging that direction. So what do we do to get confident that we can aggregate our demand and then use it to commit to charging infrastructure providers so that they can build charging infrastructure? And then the last group is, going back to that flywheel concept, right, is we absolutely recognize that even if you get the economics right and the charging infrastructure right, if nobody knows about it or doesn't understand it, you're dead in the water. So there are also some really interesting partnerships we have in different regions, and we're looking to bolster this to educate and inform and get the word out about the experience driving EVs as an Uber driver or general public. We've got a couple of those locally here, Plug and Drive, and we have a few of those that are also working in other regions around the world. But those are the type of partnerships, I would say. Those three categories are things that we would be looking for and will be looking more and more for over the next few years.
Terrific, thank you. So Rebecca has kindly agreed to take questions from the audience. So if anybody would like to ask Rebecca a question, please head on up to the microphone. And I think
only softballs.
Yeah,
only
nice
softballs.
For Rebecca.
Don't let these guys in the front ask any questions.
I was going to fill in with another question, but we already have some questions. So, Troy, we have on the microphone, so please go ahead.
So UberX is around the same...
a little bit closer.
Oh, yeah, we need a bit more sound.
So UberX is around the same price as Uber Green, and how do you guys as a corporation stay profitable while incentivizing drivers to go green? Yep. Or in other words, how do you guys balance profitability, pushing sustainability versus profitability?
Oh, such a good question. And I think a good question for any company right now, right? Like, how do you make that balance? Like I said, I think for Uber, it's a little bit, I would say it's like slightly easier for us than some other companies, because as I mentioned, some of our drivers today on that cost equation are paying less. So they're, taking home more dollars. And so what I mean by that is, like, there's a bet we can make as Uber if we can kind of push EVs up on our platform over time. The actual cost there is lower, and so a big goal of Uber overall right now is to improve the affordability of our platform. So yes, right now, are we paying in incentives, direct incentives to EV drivers? We are, but that's absolutely against a bet that longer term, having more and more EVs will actually drive down our costs, which means we can lower our cost for our riders, which is a big priority. So that's like what it means for Uber. I think in the bigger context, it's a really challenging question of how do you go back to the sustainable aviation fuel. How do you actually make that trade-off between, hey, our cost is 2x more and for sustainable aviation fuel, and we don't have a good outlook of when that will get to price parity. So you are kind of trading P&L. I don't think that's an easy equation, and the only way you can kind of go back to it is either right thing to do from a company standpoint, and or consumer demand and consumer interest you see from that. And that second one, the first one we absolutely believe in, but second one also is one there we absolutely have a thesis that over time consumers will prefer Uber because we offer these Uber Green, Comfort Electric, more sustainable options. So it is a bit of a bet on the future, but I think it's absolutely a bet at Uber we're making, and I think other companies, you've seen them make similar bets. Thank you for the question.
Perfect.
Great discussion. Enjoyed the conversation about partnerships and the flywheel. I read an article that last year in Q4 in Canada, Uber made the statement that it'd be 100% electric by 2030.
Yep.
Which I think is a great goal. How do you see the challenges dealing with, let's say, charging deserts, low income, disadvantaged communities, the whole idea of energy justice, where you probably have a lot more higher penetration of people using your services?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, to touch on a couple of notes there. One, we have a very aggressive goal. We have very aggressive goals at Uber around moving towards being a zero emissions platform. So here in Canada, that's 2030. Absolutely, to be clear, it is a North Star, and we've said from the beginning that it requires really tight public-private partnership to make that happen. And candidly, right now, big challenges on the horizon. I'm speaking about here specifically. So that North Star stands, and that is my job to figure out how aggressively we can go towards that goal and what we need. Specifically addressing your questions around charging deserts and our investments there, we do, to the point earlier about what would we like to see in terms of charging investments, that does absolutely align with our driver base and our needs. And so you've seen us in some regions make some investments in areas like that. So we've done some investments in London, as an example, always with partners, charging partners, but basically giving grants, giving money to basically install infrastructure in lower income communities, as an example. We have another one of those partnerships that will launch later this year. So you will see us invest in those areas, but it's absolutely not to say that Uber can do it alone. Like we absolutely need kind of public partnership to say, if we believe Uber or commercial drivers in general have an outsized impact on our emissions, how can we really funnel our limited dollars towards that area so that every car we get has 3x the emissions benefit as other vehicles? So that's something we'd like to ask for, but something we are putting some of our dollars behind. Thanks.
Hi. So EVs are essentially batteries on wheels, right? So with
batteries on
battery
wheels?
on wheels.
Yes.
Have you thought about managed charging or incentivizing your drivers to charge a certain way at a certain time, and see how that can benefit other use cases?
Totally, great question. I'm gonna put two hats on here. One is like my Rebecca hat and like thinking about the future of everything we can do and everything we build. Absolutely. And the cool part about our user base or our drivers is that they probably are more off-peak chargers than your typical general population. So if you're thinking about where you can fill in demand, Uber drivers or commercial drivers are fantastic opportunities. So that's my like Rebecca hat vision. What can we potentially see? Totally with you. Pragmatic, putting my other hat, Uber hat on, pragmatic. We've got so many boxes, or we've got so many hoops to jump through before we get to that I'm trying to kind of be patient around it. So what I mean by that is, first we've just got to make sure that we can get our Uber drivers to kind of adjust behavior, listen to recommendations, trying to give them recommendations around being the most intelligent around charging. We've got so many like hoops, and then the relationships with the CPOs. We've got so many hoops to jump through that I think that's a bit off in the horizon. But philosophically, like from a what can we achieve there, the Uber demand like perfectly fits into how can you kind of balance demand over a 24-hour period.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we've got time for one last question, so.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
First of all, you mentioned that as CPOs, we probably shouldn't run up, and so I'm asking the question here. So Xiaoling Jiang, the CEO of Swift Charge, we have 120 stations across the country. We've noticed in our data that there are users, power users that we can tell are
totally.
Uber or Lyft drivers.
Yeah.
And we started incentivizing them through communities and as such to attract to use our infrastructure. So you mentioned that there are a lot of hoops to jump over as CPOs, and how can we meet you halfway?
Yeah, great question. Let's see, some ideas. So I'm gonna partner up the two last questions together, which is I absolutely think as CPOs you should be thinking about how can we come up with pricing structures that incentivize Uber or other commercial drivers to fill in when we have low peak demand. So that's like table stakes. I assume you guys are thinking about that already. So if you are, like, continue down that path. If you're not, start thinking about that. So that's one. The second thing I'd say is, you know, from Uber and being a tech platform, we absolutely want the experience to be as seamless as possible. So thinking about, like, I'm not sure if you do today, but acceptance of different payment methods, acceptance of different aggregated payment structures, that type of stuff. So kind of laying all the groundwork is what I would recommend that you're doing. And then kind of in parallel, we'll get our ducks in a row and then, you know, be able to bring those two together. And then maybe one last point I'd say is, the other thing is, of course, for us to recommend charging infrastructure, it's got to be, you know, low cost, reliable, seamless, easy to use. So that's my ask of all charging infrastructure developers, but absolutely ones that would be on the Uber platform. It's got to be best in class.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you everybody in the audience, and a massive thank you to you, Rebecca, for joining us today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Toronto.
Yes, thanks for having me. Thanks.